Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Deal Podcast. I'm so glad you guys are tuning in today. Super grateful for you. The mission and purpose of this podcast show is to inspire future generations of deal makers. Maybe you're getting into the world of deal making, about to go to school or college and figure out like what career path I have. Or maybe you're getting out of college and you're trying to find your first job. Maybe you've been an employee for a while and you're thinking about branching out and going on your own. Or maybe you're at the end of your career path and you built a company and it's time to start thinking succession plan and handing that company off. If that's you, we'd love to help you sell your business. But the mission and purpose of this show is to really share wisdom and knowledge in that tribal, conversation around business, success, failures, calling, path. And that's why we bring in our friends to have conversations around the topic of business and deals. So super grateful for you. If you have a deal that you'd like to talk about here on the show, or maybe a business that you'd like to talk about selling, head over to thedealpodcast.com, fill out a quick form, and we'll start that conversation. Now, Jude, why don't you kick us off today and set up an intro?
We are interviewing my good friend, John Ray Perkins. Our listeners will notice a trend with our most recent batch of podcasts. We are looking at a different kind of business, the business of ministry, and the people that go into it. We always like to focus on stories of life transition, folks who are moving from one career to the next, moving from employee to entrepreneur, moving from entrepreneur to retiree, and whatever the case may be. And so we've interviewed a lot of those. But a whole different line of work is ministry. And sometimes it's really big business in ministry. Sometimes it's just the ways that you serve. This morning we interviewed Father Jim Brady, who had such an inspiring story. If you didn't catch that one, go back and listen. But Father Brady went from practicing law into ministry, becoming a priest. Our guest today, went a little bit the opposite direction. Started his career and did decades of ministry before moving into private business work and becoming an entrepreneur and his own boss. So, both are such good paths, and I'm so inspired by all the things John Ray did in his ministry life, and then again, as a dad and a husband, and then a business owner, entrepreneur today. So, welcome, John Ray.
Thank you, Jude. I'm glad that you didn't segue into, a bit the opposite direction. That could have gone in so many different directions, from lawyer to priest, and then from minister to business owner. Glad you cleared that up.
It's not like you gave up the Lord.
No, I did not. Not at all. Not even close.
Yeah.
So, thank y'all so much for having me here. I'm gonna have to go and listen to Father Brady's podcast because I haven't done that, but I can imagine the stories. I actually had the pleasure of working for Father Brady, and in many ways still help him out a lot at St. Pius. And so his story is pretty incredible.
Yeah. So as you come here today, kind of walk us through, what do you do, John? John Ray Perkins, man. I like you use the full name. What do you do?
So today I live in the real estate sector. I've been there since 2019. As Jude mentioned, I spent a little over 2 decades in the church as a full-time minister, ministering to the youth of both St. Peter's and Carencro and St. Pius, and operated with some international Catholic organizations, regionally and nationally. And then in 2019, after our fourth kid was born in 2018, I had to figure out how to pay for all those kids. And although I love the ministry world, there was oftentimes more month than money. So a friend of mine was doing real estate, and I thought, if he could do real estate, I think anybody can do real estate. And I think that's a pretty common thought. So I jumped into real estate. The goal was to sell a few houses a year, pay for Catholic school tuition, and stay employed at the church as a full-time minister. And then COVID happened, and the world shut down, and in many ways the church got shut down. I think that's how Father Brady would say it anyway. And so my role at the church drastically shifted, and at the same time, the real estate market shifted. And so my business took off, and my role at the church wasn't needed in the capacity that it was for a time. And by the time the church was back fully operational and open, I was running a pretty large real estate business. And Father Brady and I kind of sat down and figured that out. And so today I'm 6 years in, and we're working on growing a team. I got another agent that I've partnered up with, and a couple of people that work for us, and we help people buy and sell and invest in real estate, and do a lot of that on our own as well.
As man, I love the story. Being in ministry, right? It's this calling, it's this purpose. I'm doing this for the Lord. I'm doing this to serve people. And, it's a calling that gets us into the world of ministry. And then life changes, life happens. And then sometimes it's like you have to take a pivot. And you're like, what was your conversation with the Lord when these kind of things were happening? You're like, God, I thought you called me to this world, and now I could hardly, feed my family. Like what was going on in your head and your heart when that was going on?
So I would, in order to answer that question, I'll try to be, I don't know, do we have days for this thing? Like
yeah, sure, go for it.
Yeah. Back up to like when I left St. Peter's in Carencro, right? So I was 19 years old when I got hired into full-time ministry at St. Peter's in Carencro. I could probably tell you stories of why I shouldn't have been in full-time ministry, but I'm eternally grateful for the priest that hired me, Father Bill Melanson, who took a chance on me in many ways, because I was a teenager myself, ministering to teenagers, making teenage decisions at times, still ministering to teenagers, and thought that I was going to be in that world at that church forever. We lived there. We were part of the community. I think I saw 3 generations of people come in and out of, like between the parents and the grandparents and the younger siblings who hadn't, all that. Fast forward to 2012 when I accepted the position at Pius. I accepted the position for financial reasons. I was making much less money at St. Peter's. It was a much smaller church community. Financially, it wasn't in the same place as St. Pius. But right before that, I was at a retreat, and for a couple of years, I'd been talking to my wife because I was doing the finances. She does those today. I don't even know what they look like. I probably should pay more attention. But I was doing the finances, and I kept saying, like, I got to go find something else. And she was like, no, this is what we do. Like, I think behind everybody that is in the Catholic, a layperson in the Catholic Church who's a minister, I think behind every minister, there's a good spouse, whether it's a husband or a wife, who echoes what the Lord's saying, right? And so she was that voice that really kept me in ministry. And I was at a retreat where literally I surrendered it. I was like, Lord, like, if this is what you want me to do, like I went and sat. We were at Life Teen Camp Covecrest. I went and sat in the middle of the woods on a log, like a tree that had fallen. I was like, Lord, this is it. Then I'm in. Like, I know you're going to provide. You always have. Like, I trust you. And I got off the plane from that retreat, and I had a phone call from my predecessor, who said, hey, I know you know that I'm leaving. Father Steve wants to talk to you. And so that's what opened the door to me coming to St. Pius. Now, fast forward 14 years later, I believe that door got opened to soften me to the thought of getting out of ministry full time. But it just took the Lord a little while to show me that I believe in the business world we can do more ministry than we can as lay people in the 4 walls of the church world.
Say that part again, because I think that some people might argue the opposite, and I love your perspective on this. You feel that there could be more work done as a lay person than from within the church walls. Mm-hmm. Explain.
Yeah, so I think that, for me personally, I can only speak through my lens and through my experience, but I think that the Lord has taken this step into the business world and multiplied it, because people in the business world, especially in what I do in real estate, like, I help people handle the largest transactions that some of them will ever have in their lifetime. And we navigate emotions, and we navigate, all the experiences from the death of a loved one, to the birth of a child, to a college student. I was helping parents inspect the place that they're buying for one of their college kids, to a divorce situation. Like, people have opened up to me in the business world in ways that I don't believe that they would have ever opened up, or ways that honestly they never opened up to me in the church world. I've walked with people in a real estate transaction whose marriage literally fell apart. Like, that's not why we were selling the house, but it fell apart while the house was listed. And then continued to walk with them as we took the house off the market, continued to pray with both of them, and then watch the reconciliation happen over the years. That doesn't happen in every case, but like, the Lord has really allowed me so many different ministerial moments on this side of ministry.
When you talked about that, I can't help but think, how much context matters. And, you go on a retreat, people are expecting to have you talk to them about the Lord. And at church, people are expecting you to talk about the Lord. Whenever you're talking to your closest friend and you say something that's kind, they expect you to say a kindness to them. But whenever you talk to a stranger, and you say a kindness to them, it means so much to a stranger. And whenever you talk to someone about the Lord in a secular context, it has such a different impact than it would have at church, or that it would have on a retreat, or whatever the case may be. Do you find that it's difficult to inject your faith into the business world, that it's an awkward thing at times, or does it come freely to you?
Going into the business world, I people in the church world kind of tempered me and cautioned me, like, hey, you better be careful how you wave this like Jesus flag, because you're going to turn people off. And what I do, like, I end up working with more people that I know than more people that I don't know, right? But I guess the best way to answer that story is to tell you a story. I was 6 months in, maybe. I met a lady at Costco who was buying pink balloons. I often walk out of a store and my kids will ask me, like, Dad, did you know that person? Because it's who I am. I'll strike up a conversation with a stranger. And I asked her that day why she was buying pink balloons. And, sometimes it's open mouth, insert foot, right? She ends up telling me that her daughter had just been diagnosed with breast cancer, and her daughter was pregnant, I think 6 months into the pregnancy. And so, like, I tempered that, and we talked. And as I was walking to my truck in the Costco parking lot, I walked up to her and I handed her my real estate business card. It was the only business card that I had. Handed it to her, and I said, hey, I also work for a church, because I was still full-time at the church at that time. I just started real estate. I said, I want to pray for you. What's your daughter's name? Would you keep me in the loop? Like, would you let me know what's going on? And so fast forward, a few months later, she gives me a call. She lets me know that her daughter's doing fine. The baby's born. They're starting some more aggressive treatments, all of this and that, but that her son's in town, and he wants to go look at some houses. Could I show him some houses the next day? So we went and saw 4 or 5 houses, and we ended up, this is right early 2020. We ended up writing an offer on a house not very far from St. Pius. And they called me up that day, and he was like, hey, we want to go see this house. And he gave me the address, and we ended up going into a multiple offer on that house. And so this was pre-COVID. Like, we haven't shut down. We haven't experienced multiple offers, and we're in this multiple offer. And then weeks later, the world shuts down. Well, when he called me, I was sitting in my office at Pius, and he said, hey, can we go see this house? I was like, yeah, I'm 5 minutes from there. I'm at St. Pius. How long will it take y'all? And when we got there, he said, and there were some key things that happened in this interaction and these showing houses where I realized these weren't really religious people. We were buying a house. It didn't matter. And when I got there, he asked me the question. He was like, hey, why were you at St. Pius? And I answered the question by telling him, well, this is what I do for the church, whatever it was that I did at that time. I wasn't in youth ministry anymore. But my role was still kind of unknown. Father Brady and I were figuring it out. And he said, oh, well, I don't believe in God. And I was like, okay, that's fine. We're buying a house. I don't need you to believe in God. Just know that it doesn't change who I am. I don't expect my belief in God to change who you are. And so we wrote an offer. I didn't like that house at all. Like I told the guy, I was like, this is a terrible investment. Wrote the offer. The world shut down. Fast forward, 2 months later, it's the end of April. I get a phone call from the listing agent who says, hey, the contract's falling apart. Are y'all still interested? I was like, I don't know. Like, let me call him. So I call him up and he tells me that, he was moving to Louisiana because his sister had breast cancer and his dad had prostate cancer, and both of them were in remission. And he said, so I think my reasons for moving, I hate Louisiana. I think my reasons have changed. And I said, I believe that God protected you from putting a contract on that house because he knew your reasons were going to change. And there was just this pause, like you could feel the pause. And then we went about our conversation. I don't think I changed that guy's life in any way, but I was able to witness to him and be who I am, regardless of what his beliefs were, in a way that I don't think threatened him. He and I still talk several times. He lives in California. Like, we still talk a lot, but we don't talk about God. I still respect that about him, but I had the opportunity to share that with him. So I don't think it changes who I am, and I haven't yet had a moment where it made somebody not want to work with me because of who I am.
Jude, it's the opposite. I bet a lot of people want to work with you because of your faith. And I'm always hesitant about that, like letting your faith be the reason you earn business.
Sure.
But it's because of who you are.
Well, when I was discerning, getting into real estate and trying to figure it out, I sat with a buddy of mine and I was kind of sharing with him, like, it's 2019. Alicia and I had nothing in the bank. Like, we had managed that year to save up some money. Like, we had the most we had ever had, and then we had both vehicles break and kids got sick, and the little bit of money that we had saved went. And that's when I told her, I was like, hey, we got to figure something out. And so I went and sat down with my buddy Wes, and what he told me was exactly what you just said, Jude. He said, real estate is all about working with people who know you and love you and trust you. And he said, and I want you to think about all the people over all the years that you've done ministry with. He said, when they have a real estate need and they know that you're in this world, they're going to call you. He said, let's just take that and put it on the shelf because it's going to happen. He said, now I want you to think about the ones that are like, they've fallen away from God. They're not coming to church. They're in a bad relationship. And now all of a sudden you were their minister and you're back in their life, like in this new way, but you're back in their life. And like, that was the thing in the discernment that God kept bringing me back to, was like, there's a voice that I can put back into some of these relationships. And the crazy thing is, it happened in 6 months. Like, in 6 months, there's a guy that I'm working with today, 6 years later, who 6 months in, we were reconnected. He didn't have a real estate need, but he's sitting in my office because he's in a bad relationship, and it's a toxic relationship. And we're praying and talking because I was the guy that prayed and talked with him when he was in high school, and so the Lord has definitely provided all of those opportunities as well.
There's a saying that Jude has when someone's like, hey man, just want you to know, I don't believe in God. What do you say, Jude?
It's okay. He believes in you.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, I do too. All right. So let's talk about this idea of, you're struggling financially. And for me, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, man. When I struggled, I've been bankrupt, been on food stamps, had to move back in with mom and dad. That's been one of my biggest struggles is, I built something big and then it collapsed, or built this or what, it doesn't matter. It's not about me. But what I'm trying to do is set some context is, those anxieties, man, when you've got babies to feed, diapers to put on their butts, and you're working, for the church, or you're working just in general, and you're working to as much as you can, as hard as you can. How do you find faith and trust in God? Because you were sitting on that log and you're like, okay, Lord, I trust you. That sounded easy for you to say, but man, there's probably some struggle in there about really trusting in the Lord with your provision, with your family, not just you. You could sleep on a bench, I'm sure. But when you got little mouths to feed, man, there's a whole new level of trust. How do you approach that?
Man, today I still can't log into my bank account. Like, that's why I don't take care of the finances. Right? My wife and I are working through this. I probably need some therapy, but it is. It's like, I know money's there today, but there were so many times where I would log in and, like, it was like, okay, is there going to be any money
when you
left?
swipe it, like, please work, please work.
Exactly. Like, it was swiping the credit card after a certain date in the month because you knew that you're going to have 60 days to pay that bill. Like, a lot of newlyweds or engaged couples would ask me a very similar question when I was in ministry. And honestly, my answer still today hasn't changed. The years that Alicia and I spent, ministering to the people that God put in our charge and our care, there was never a time that I was worried that we were going to be able to pay a bill. And there are so many times where I've looked back and wondered how those bills got paid, and I mean, it was 8 months into our kids being at school at St. Pius. And like, when we made that leap to move my wife from the public school system to the Catholic school system, which came with better insurance, but slightly less pay. I mean, it wasn't an astronomical difference, but it also came with, hey, if we're going to do this, then why aren't we moving our kids here, and praying through that. And then, there was a month where it was like, okay, things are going to be really tight. And then somebody stepped in and paid our tuition, like the Lord constantly stepped up and provided and surprised us, really, like, over and over again. And look, honestly, there are times in the pipeline of real estate where I'm like, ooh, things are getting tough, or I get the text saying, hey, are you going to have a closing soon? Like, and I'm reminded of all those years where the Lord just showed up. And so I know he's going to continue to show up, and it's not because of something somebody taught me, but it's because of what I've lived through, Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, man. I love that. As you're, building out your team now, and you're building out the real estate, you started by yourself, doing it as a kind of a side hustle to bring in some extra money. Through world events that was out of your control, one took off, the other one started to fade away, right? You started getting into this. So getting into a new career, and now it's thriving, and you're building team members, and you have a strategic partner, and you've grown. What were some of the mindset shifts that you had to go along the way? When you left the ministry, was there an identity crisis or a new identity set? So like, what were some mindset shifts or maybe even identity shifts along the way getting into business?
It's a great question. So I jumped out in September of 2019, and the brokerage that I'm with has a bunch of like coaching mindset courses and classes and whatnot, right? And I mean, Alicia and I are like, I'm literally giving talks and doing speaking engagements in order to pay for licenses, and like, we're borrowing from Peter very much to pay Paul, and then this, I'm 30 days in, and one of these classes is called Bold. Business Objectives, Life by Design, right? And it's a total mindset class. Like, they teach you some real estate stuff, but it's more about how you think than anything, right? Which I think is, in hindsight, is the business world. Like, your mindset comes through in this world totally. But it's funny how the Lord works, because the coach in that class is a former minister who became a car salesman, who became a real estate agent, who ended up becoming a coach, right? And so, like, I remember vividly 3 weeks into this class sitting with him going, okay, how did you know when ministry was like, when the professional side of ministry, that door was closing? Like, so we spent a lot of time talking through that, right? But I just shared, we have that class starts next week. They run it every year at our brokerage. And last week I was on a panel where they were asking about, how that class totally, it shifted how I think. And I literally tell people, like, in my life, it's Jesus, it's my wife and family, and then it's Bold. Like, the way that it taught me to think, bigger, and to be able to visualize things. And like, I heard a story on a podcast yesterday that Walt Disney died before Disney World was ever built. And somebody asked his brother, like, man, what do you think he would, like, what do you think he would have thought if he would have seen this, you know? And the brother's answer was, if he couldn't see it, we would have never seen it. You know, like, and I was like, ooh, and that's the kind of stuff that Bold did. But it didn't just do that for me, right? Like, Bold set me up to where I am today, and it launched my business, and it launched how I think in the business world. But I took that and I brought it back into my house, and like, my kids hate when Bold comes around, because I start changing how they speak, and I'm very just cognizant of like the negatives and the limits that they put on themselves through language. And so Bold is probably the biggest shift in mindset that I've experienced in real estate.
Jude, I think you have such a larger vision than I do. And every time like we hang out and you start talking about, you know, like, I play a lot in the startup space. The idea of delegation and building systems and process, like, I'm growing to that next level. Jude, you're buying and selling, you know, large companies and helping with very, very successful companies and large transactions. Has that always been your mindset, or like what is next after, you know, from startup to where you're at in terms of mindset growth or next steps?
Well, I didn't always do this, but I always wanted to. I like the private equity world. It makes a lot of sense to me. Most startups fail, and you know, that's the starting point for my mindset. I like things where I can reasonably calculate the outcome to a near certainty. It doesn't have to be certain. Risk is okay, but I like to eliminate risk a lot. So that we're taking really smart risk that has a big payoff at the end. And because most startups fail, I'd rather just skip that part. And if you do an acquisition of a business, you know, small business that's still struggling, you know, at least you've gotten past the acquisition phase, past the startup phase. You do an acquisition of a bigger business that's, you know, really got processes and a good team, and you know, it's humming along. You're going to pay a lot more for it, but you have the ability to skip past all those hard parts and kind of get into the fun part of the business. And yeah, the acquisition cost is hard, but what gets really exciting is you skip all of that, and you can still grow substantially from where it is at the time that you bought it, and double it or triple it or quadruple it while you own it. And so I just gravitate to that. You know, I'm a little bit in awe of people that start things from scratch. I've never been good at that. So I think my percentage of success might be lower than the average if it comes to startups and like getting things off the ground. And so it's really just a matter of understand what you're good at and gravitate to that. You know, John Ray has been so good at you know, building this real estate network just from scratch. Like you literally went from like ministering to youth to like being a guy who's successful at you know, at real estate. So, you know, tell us about that journey.
I think it's who you, I think it is exactly what you're touching on. Like, so it started in Bold, and then COVID hit, and then, you know, real estate started taking off, and it was exactly what Wes said. It was, you know, hey, people are going to hear you're doing this thing, and they already have a relationship with you, so they're going to call you. And so in the COVID world, that's what happened. The phone rang, like, and it rang and it rang and it rang. And we were showing houses at 9 o'clock at night that had 10 offers on them, and learning how to compete in that world. And in December of 2020, I hired my first coach. He was a guy in our office who had been in the real estate world forever. He came at a very inexpensive price. And we coached together for about 6 months. What I benefit that conversation was to actually look at the pipe and know, you know, like, hey, what's pending right now? You know, what's coming? What pond are we fishing in? And, you know, who's biting, and like, where do we continue to fish? And that conversation led into Alicia stepping out of the class in 21. And so she retired from teaching in May of 21. And stayed home to take care of our family. And then life happened, and we had a few deaths in the family. So like it was it was actually perfect discernment. It didn't initially look like what we thought it was going to look like. But having her outside of the classroom to be able to take care of family members and walk with them, and that was great. And then that coach and I kind of parted ways when summertime hit. I like to tell people I like to take the summer off. I don't take the summer off, but I just feel like I don't work as hard during the summer, and I think it's natural. My kids are home. I want to sleep in. I want to hang out with the family. I want to do all of that. But in December of 21, for the first time since getting into real estate, the market shifted again, and I felt it shift. And I remember looking at a buddy and said, hey, you had a coach and you liked your coach. Like, I want to meet your coach, because he and I had a very similar personality. I watched what his coach did for him. And I literally told him, I said, I don't know if I'm going to have money in 6 months because the market's shifting, but I have money right now. So I want to hire a coach right now. And so I got introduced to Mike, and Mike and I actually coached together from January of 22 until the November of last year of 25. And so Mike became a productivity coach. He became a mindset coach. He became a sounding board as a dad who has teenage kids who are dumb and make dumb decisions because they're teenagers and that's what they're supposed to do. He was the first phone call that I made when my wife was diagnosed with cancer. Like Mike he was a coach, but he also became a friend and a sounding board. But in January or February of 24, Mike touched on what you just said, Jude. He said, John Ray, you have a very high paying job, but you don't have a business. And that's where things in our coaching relationship began to shift in a good way, because we started looking at systems and processes and models and, the database and how people are organized and how we automate things. And that's still very much, I'm with a new coach today, but that's very much where we're at, like looking at the systems and the models and the processes, because one day I don't want to hustle in real estate sales. One day I want to be able to step out and I want to take what we've built and be able to sell that, in some capacity to another agent and say, hey, if you run this play, I can guarantee you that you're going to get this percentage out of what we're doing,
Yeah.
Well, what you do is very similar to what we do. It's both the world of brokerage. Helping people to sell their companies is just a series of 1,000 decisions they need to make, whereas selling a piece of real estate might be a series of 10 or 15 decisions to make.
Sure.
And what I find in common about both, people get very emotional whenever they are parting with an asset and when they have to make a lot of decisions about it. We've witnessed it a lot in selling businesses. We always start with a evaluation. It's a free service. Go to famergers.com. You can get your appointment set up to have a free valuation done of your business. And we do this constantly. Every week we're doing these valuations. And we help people to understand what their business is worth. And very often that's an exciting conversation for people, because they see, oh my gosh, this asset really is worth something and somebody might want to buy it. And let's say we tell somebody your company's probably worth about $10 million. They say, great, I want you to sell it for me. And we go out, we market it to the world, and we get them $12 million. And it's like, oh my gosh, what a perfect outcome. We got you 20% more than we thought we could. And they're like, it's just not enough. It's just not, it's not what I hoped it would be. And it's like, well, we told you 10. So like, what did you reasonably expect? They said, well, I thought 10 at that point, but my world's changed or whatever. And it's all an emotional thing. And I find it all the time with real estate too. I've had pieces of property that we've offered full price and people go, oh, wow, full price? Like I wasn't expecting that. It's like, well, you priced it well. So yeah. I made a full price offer. And then you have other times where, people have been on the market for 4 years with an astronomical number by comparison to what the market would say their property's worth. And so like you make a fair offer for it. They go, oh, you're lowballing the crap out of me. And it's like, no, I'm just offering a fair price. Like you can take it or you cannot take it. But people get so emotional about it. how do you deal with that emotion in your world? Like systems and processes help, but like it's such a sucker punch whenever you're the night before closing and your client just goes, oh, you know what? I rethought it. I just can't do it.
So it's funny that you asked that question today because we had a similar conversation yesterday. I told a guy that we could get a certain price on his house. It's his mom's house. He inherited it. And it's a bit dated, but it had a bunch of property. And I was like, hey, look, I think we can go in here. I think this is the number. I think this is what we're going to sell it for. And then for a bunch of reasons, he had to wait for a while, and so we waited. He painted. He did a few little things, but nothing that really moved that needle. And so when he called me back up and he was ready, I said, hey, I think the number's still the same. I said, however, your property doesn't exist in our market right now. Like if somebody's looking for what you have, it doesn't exist. So why don't we go in here? And I upped that price pretty significantly, and I said, keep in mind, this is the number, right? And I thought for sure we were going to make a series of reductions, but he had time. And because he had time, there was no urgency in selling. So let's see what the market would bear. And 16 days later, we found our buyer with a full price offer with almost no asks and inspections, right? The only caveat was it's contingent upon their ability to sell this other house. They find the buyer for their other house. Appraiser calls me yesterday and says, hey, what did you use to set the value of this price? And of course, I can't tell him we literally made up a number, and so I was like, look, I'll send you some stuff, send me your email address, give me the measurement of the house. Cause I had measured it. I'm sure it was a little off. Fortunately, it was a little bigger than what I had measured. And I said, hey, by the way, like, where are you at? I know you have the buyer. You can't tell me a whole lot, but where you're at. And he was almost by suggestion where I told the guy we were going to sell. So I hung up with him. I called my guy and I'm like, hey, appraiser just called. Here's where we're at, blah, blah, blah. And I said, and look, this might be where the number comes in. And he said, I don't know if that makes sense for me to sell. Exactly what you just said. Only the opposite, right? It's significantly lower than what he thought we were going to be able to get. And I was like, but this is what we talked about, And so he and I talked for a little bit, and then I blind copied him in the when I emailed the appraiser back. I made a good argument. I used AI for my argument to kind of polish what I wanted to say. And then he called me and he said, hey, I read it. It looks good. I think, let's see where the chips fall. I'm going to sell, in my world, I think the data helps a lot, just because I try to have very clear upfront conversations from the get-go. Like, hey, this is what I think. This is what the market's telling us. Like, we try to drill down specifically. And then along the way, I share that data. Sometimes it just doesn't work out, Like, I have a guy that we expired on the market, and he's listed, and he listed $50,000 higher than what we expired at. And today he's back down to where we expired at. And I'm pretty sure he's going to sell right around where I told him he's going to sell. So some people, I just don't think that, I'm sure in your world, it's what their thought is. And some people, the data helps, I think communication and staying in front of people and constantly talking through it has worked in my world on more often than not.
Yeah. So I think real estate is a lot like company sales, though. There's a formula and a process for how we value what things are worth.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone involved uses that formula. The buyers have their representatives. The sellers have their representatives. Everyone's using a bank, and that bank is going to want those normal formulas to be used in an evaluation. So there's no extra money because you think it's worth more. And so, yeah, you have more available data selling real estate because you have all the comps that you can look at and you can point to. But it's a very tight formula in business valuations. And just like real estate, maybe we can get 5 or 10% over that number, and like maybe we can twist the arm of an appraiser and like get that number just a hair higher. But I don't think people are tying their emotion to getting 5% more than what it's worth. They're tying their emotion to getting 50% more than what it's worth.
Yeah.
And that's just not realistic.
No.
It's not realistic at all. And when you let that emotion creep into what you're doing, like, you're really going to be disappointed at the end. I don't know how to bridge that gap. It's one of the biggest challenges we have selling businesses because, we work on a success basis. So we don't make a dollar unless the transaction happens at the end, but we work on these deals for 6 months or a year. And so it's obviously a punch in the gut whenever a client gets to the end and they've got a deal that's more than they ever thought it was, but they just can't pull the trigger. What's that psychology like? How do you bring people along during the process to like make sure that they've made up their mind before we get to that closing table?
Man, so there's been a handful of deals in the last 6 years that have, like, we're gonna vet out motivation a lot now. Like, I had some friends of mine that we had a house listed, and he was I don't know if the guy was an accountant or an engineer, but that's how his brain worked, right? He was very numbers oriented, very analytical. So I was constantly feeding him data, and finally he just told me, he was like, look, I'm not going to fire sale the house because the market doesn't work, or because the market is where, although the data that I showed him showed that his house market-wise was more viable in that particular market than it had ever been historically, right? And I just got to the point where it was just like, hey, man, you're a friend, and you're not listening to me. Like, and this is what I do, and I want to be friends. So I think you need to go find another agent. And we agreed to part ways that day. And that was a life lesson for me from that moment forward. Like, I want to know why you want to sell, what your motivation is to selling. Because if you don't need to sell, then we might not be a good fit, because if your pricing is unrealistic, if, I can't do what the market's not going to do. Like, no matter what, a coach told me once, if you have two gas stations across the street from each other, each selling a gallon of milk, and one of them is at $5 or $6 a gallon, whatever you pay for a gallon of milk today, and the other one's at $15 a gallon, but they're willing to put $100 million into marketing the $15 a gallon milk, which one's going to get purchased? Well, the $5 gallon of milk is going to get bought before no matter how much marketing dollars you put into the $15. And so if you're just unrealistic, I don't know that we're going to be a good fit. And I would rather keep the relationship because of who I am than to ruin the relationship. Because like I said, I work with a lot of people that I already have relationships with,
Yeah, this may actually be an area where real estate and company sales differ a good bit because, motivation matters a lot in real estate, and somebody needing to sell or having an urgency to sell can be a really good thing in real estate because the asset is still worth what the asset's worth regardless of their motivation. In company sales, it's actually a little bit different. The best companies to sell are the ones that don't need the owner. The owner doesn't need them. And they haven't been living out of the business because they don't need that cash flow. And the business is firing on all cylinders. So, they have a business that supports them as much as they want without them ever having to touch it.
Yeah.
And that makes a perfect client for us. And unfortunately, that client doesn't need to sell at all. And that's a particular challenge with selling businesses because they've got a well-oiled machine. It pumps out cash flow more than they need for their living that they want to have. And so they don't need a pile of cash all at once. The thing just pumps money out every year.
Yeah.
And
whereas a real estate asset, no matter what, it's going to drain money from you.
Yeah.
Like it might drain $36 a year if you're in a rural part of the market and your property taxes are really low and you're not living in it. Like it may only be, $1,600 a year total between the utilities and all of that, but it's going to suck some money out of you if you don't have somebody in it paying the bill.
Yeah,
right.
You're hoping on the appreciation, but the only way you get that appreciation is if you sell.
Yeah,
and so that makes it a little.
And the analogy that I often use with people, I thought it was a script that we were taught when I first got into real estate, because we were taught a lot of scripts as in any sales business. But like the market will always pay what the market will pay no matter what. You can't underprice a house, right? And I always thought that was a script. And then we hit COVID. We learned that's not a script. Like we were appraising houses and listing them for $50,000 more than that, and then catching the buyer and driving that price up and making appraiser, because there was just so much demand, right? And so today, when I sit down with somebody that wants to sell an asset, I tell them that, like, we can't underprice your house. Like, there's no fear in underpricing your house. If we price it, we may sit on the market for 400 days, and somebody may come and give us a decent offer that you're not going to like because we've been on the market for 400 days. But if we take that same house, and let's just say it's a $500,000 house, and we put it on the market for $1, like, we just get absurd with it, what's going to happen? We're going to drive up demand. Everyone that is a buyer in our market is going to come, and they have access to the data, the same data that we see. So not only are we going to sell it for $500,000, but in that scenario, we might actually sell it for more than $500,000, because we're going to get so many offers on it, and we're just going to drive up the price, So I would imagine that would be a hard thing to create in the business world, in selling a business asset.
Yeah, it's great when it happens.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the, I looked at the clock, and man, time flew.
Sure.
Really grateful for
We've
your
been
time.
here for 10 minutes.
Yeah, it feels like it. One of our great joys is connecting our guests, and the way that we do that is in studio guests, they leave behind a question. So Father Brady knew you were coming on, used to work with him. He left a question behind. So Jude's going to read it, a mix between written and on his phone. Go for it, Jude.
He went very specific on you, so
I'm
get
sure.
ready.
Yeah.
With the evolving roles and functions of lay people and clergy since Vatican II, how do you envision those roles in an ideal parish?
Man, that question could go in so many different directions. I think in many ways, our priests are underformed in regards to running a business, right? Father Brady's probably the exception to that, because he ran a business, so he understands that, and it's one of the things that I enjoy about, my interactions with him today, and my interactions with him when I was a full-time employee at the church, is he understands the business world. But many of our priests, like, they were formed to minister to the church through the sacraments, right? And that's what they should be doing, right? And so I think the evolution of priests and lay people, I think the church needs more lay people that can come, from a business lens, also from the heart of a minister, right? Because as lay people, we live in families, we grow teenagers, we interact in society. We have our fingers on the pulse of what's happening in our communities. And I think that we bring a unique perspective as lay people on how to walk with God's people through whatever they're going through in life, which is probably what I enjoy about real estate the most, is that I get to walk with so many different people and so many different legs in their journey.
I've had so many priests comment over time on marriage, kids and their behavior in church, and cry rooms. And, you hear these opinions, and I say, Father, you're not qualified to have an opinion on that.
No, and nor should you be, right? Like,
yeah, like that's not your role, and you've never been there. And I think it takes people aback a little bit. Like, well, of course I'm qualified to have an opinion. I'm a priest,
Yeah.
It's like, well, no, like you're qualified to have a lot of theological opinions on a lot of things. Like how a married person is interacting with their spouse, and like what good communication looks like there. You really haven't walked that walk. And so like, it's very easy from the outside to say, well, this is how you should communicate. But I mean, really, you've never walked that walk.
That's right.
Cry rooms, like you've never sat there with a kid in cry rooms trying to figure this out. So like, don't really tell me about
walking out of the church with the kid screaming, "Dad, don't spank me."
Yeah.
And so lay people are so vital to the church in a lot of ways. I mean, those are just a few silly examples, but
So good.
Like how are you going to build a marriage ministry wrapped around priests that's as good as a marriage ministry wrapped around good, faithful married people?
Yeah.
And, you know, how are you going to have a priest designing cry rooms whenever, you know, lay people can actually have real good, valid, informed judgments about what those should look like, and 1,000 other things that lay people can get really involved in. But probably most of all, I mean, if people need to be evangelized to in life, so that they can learn to know and love the Lord, you know, how effective is it whenever they see people that they know or that look like them or in the same roles that they are or in the same walk of life that they are, living their faith? You know, it's very easy to see a priest and say, "Oh, well, yeah, he's a priest. Of course, he loves the Lord."
He has to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, when you see John Ray Perkins living his faith, talking to that mom in a parking lot with the pink balloons and whatever it is, I mean, that makes an impact on people's life.
Yeah. How do we as ministers in the church, whether we're priests or lay people, how do we get God's people out of the church into the world to live out what we experience there? I think that's the question. I don't know. That's a whole nother podcast, but that's the question that we must answer.
Yeah. People see me walking with my 6 young children in Costco, and they get a very particular view of, you know, a Catholic family. And on some days it might be a good view, and on other days they're like, "Oh my gosh, they went and lost it." You know?
It's chaos, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's such a great question, such a great comment, Jude. And this is how I want to tie it into something that you kind of attributed in the very beginning. We said, what would you really like to talk about? And you said, surround yourself with like-minded people heading in a common direction.
Mm-hmm.
But then you said, hire a coach. You're like, man, I attribute a lot of my success to hiring coaches. With what Jude's saying is people who have experience or who have an opinion because this is their level of expertise, they're ahead of the game. Like you would want to go to a marriage group taught by people who have been through tough marriage life and have a successful marriage that you want to mirror, right?
Mm-hmm.
Parlaying this into the business question here is you wanted to grow a business. You said, I have a high-paying job. I want to grow a business that one day I can maybe not as hustle as hard or that I can sell it. And you said, I want to hire a coach. Let's talk about this, hiring a coach, and then we'll put a bow on this and we'll wrap it up. But when it comes to hiring a coach, what should you look for? How do you get over the point where maybe I don't have money tomorrow, I have money today? And would you consider it a vital aspect of building a business?
Man, so for me, like, yes to all of that. Mike was probably one of the biggest investments. I mean, he and I just actually had a call this week. I love that we're continuing to stay in touch and keeping a pulse. But like, he gave me a perspective in the business world that I could have never gotten on my own because he was at a place that I'd never been before, right? And then in that transition between Mike and Megan, who was my next coach, Megan, I had this aha at a conference about events and event-driven real estate, right? For years in the church world, I created events for people to experience conversion, right? I did that at a high success rate. And there was this epiphany of like, why am I not creating events for people to just gather so that I can be in relationship with them so that when they have a need. And so Megan's niche was events and how to create events and then drive relationships around these events. But then now I'm with Athea, right? So Megan and I spent 12 weeks, 15 weeks together because she coaches to a very specific need. And then she gets bored. She'll tell you that, right? But she asked me the question, like, what's next for you? I was like, well, I'm I'm ADHD, or as she called me, I'm neurospicy. So like I'm all over the place. Like I have great ideas, but no follow up. And I told her, I was like, I need somebody that's going to help me look at the systems that we have, tweak those, and then tell me what we're missing, and then help me build those. And so today I'm coaching with Athea, who is the director of operations for a mega team out of Austin. And so she knows all the systems and models. And like, we're 4 weeks into this conversation and she hasn't even given me suggestions yet because we haven't gone through my business and how it operates yet, you know? And so I think all that to say, like when you're hiring a coach, you need somebody obviously that is at a place and experienced the success that you've never been or had before. And then it's also okay to switch coaches. Like you're going to hit a point where that coach is going to have given you everything that they can give you, and you're going to plateau. And you need to be keenly aware of where that plateau is or when it's happening so that you can start looking for the next coach. And I think that if you have a good coach, your coach is going to help you find the next coach.
If you have a good coach.
There's good coaches everywhere. You know, when you want to figure out how to get a business off the ground, find somebody who's done it. You know, your bankers are your coaches, your CPAs are your coaches, your lawyers are your coaches. You're going to learn so much from those guys. You know, obviously consultants and actual business coaches. You know, we're coaches too. You get to the end of your business journey, and you need to be brought through the exit process. And for almost every business owner we work with, they will do it exactly one time. You know, they've never done it before, and they'll never do it again. And we have some, you know, some others that are serial entrepreneurs, and they do it multiple times, and great for them. But that's not the typical case. Most will do it exactly one time. And so, like, I can't think of a better moment to have a coach than that moment in your career when it's like, this is everything, because you do it well and you retire really well, and you do it poorly and you don't retire. And so, you know, I hope people understand that. You know, we try to help them understand it. So many folks wait too long. They don't get that advice early enough, and you know, they end up selling their business because they get disabled or they get cancer or, you know, whatever the case may be. And those are just the saddest cases.
Yeah, because
it's like, man, you missed your opportunity. But one coach of one business owner I worked with had such good advice. You know, when you're considering, do you sell your business? You have to think about QTR. It's quality time remaining. And, you know, you're probably going to get a certain number of years that you get to have quality years in life to do all the things you want to do. And, you know, figure that out, you know, based on what you want to do in life. Maybe that's age 70, maybe that's age 75 of, you know, I need to do these things that I want to do in life before that age. Subtract your current age from that, and you figure out your QTR. It's your quality time remaining. And most people wait too late to where that QTR number is too small. And, you know, I wish they'd do it a little sooner. I wish they'd, you know, figure out how to capitalize on that biggest asset they've ever built in their life. We're here to do it every day. We're here to help people do it. So
yeah,
hopefully they figure it out.
John, you know what I just did? I went to go swipe down on my page that I'm handwriting. I was like, how come this thing's not scrolling? I don't know if you've ever done that. These paper.
Glad to know it's not just me that does stuff like that.
Totally me. That's so funny, man. I was like, this thing's broken. All right, I need to reset this paper. John, why don't you, as we wrap up towards the end, man, word of encouragement to entrepreneurs out there. Maybe something's on your heart that you want to share with them, pray with them, whatever it is. The mic's yours.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're listening to this and you're an entrepreneur, I think, you know, everything that we talked about here, mindset, coaching, surrounding yourself with people. I know, like, for me, that's probably the biggest key is who I surround myself with. And so make sure you're in the right rooms. You know, there's that old adage, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Make sure you're in rooms with people who are achieving things that you haven't yet achieved, because there's so much opportunity to learn there. You know, when you don't have to hire a coach, there's probably somebody that is a little bit ahead of you that if you can't afford the coach right now, would be willing to sit down and mentor you and talk to you. But it's who you surround yourself with that matters. And so surround yourself with people that are doing great things. I would add to that, surround yourself with people who love the Lord too, because man, most of the people that I have met who are doing great things also love the Lord. So
cool. You guys heard it. As always, reach out to our guests, say thanks for being on the show. Their contact information will be in the show notes below. And then I really want to encourage you guys as you're contemplating different business ideas, or maybe selling a company or buying a company, to reach out to a coach, reach out to someone who's done it. Over here at our team, we're happy to have those conversations. You could connect with us at famergers.com, or you could go to the I do this for a living, thedealpodcast.com, and fill out a quick form, man. Love to chat with you guys and hear your ideas, hear your thoughts, and maybe get you on the show next. Till then, see you guys. Cheers.